brought you to this area?
That I blame my folks. I'm a geologist
Right.
before I became vintner, so I was actually working in Colorado. I was what they call geotechnical engineer. So basically, we would do stuff from landslide investigation, soil compactions for roads, airports, all these kind of things. And so I did that. And that was my degree, geology from University of Colorado Boulder. And so I was working in Colorado, and my father and mother always wanted to do some sort of vineyard winery thing, and they didn't know the scale, so they went to UC Davis, took some extension classes, kind of learned about it. As I said before, my father was smitten because he had made documentaries on growing grapes and wine in France, and my mother grew up on a farm in Poland, so for her the idea of coming back to to the land was sort of her perfect come around. So they sort of became the driving force of that, and look for the land, and they lived in LA, so this was obviously the backyard to look into, and so they came up here frequently, but they had been looking for a long time. I mean, honestly, they actually looked at land in Napa in the 70s. I kick myself sometimes. When my father passed away, I was cleaning out his office and came across a couple old real estate brochures. One of them was for a piece of land that was like $300,000, and I looked up the address, and it was Opus One. I'm like, oh yeah, that might have been a smart move, But I mean, given the circumstances, and I asked my mom about that once, and she said, I guess that's when they used that term. Was it land poor or whatever, or basically they would have bought the land and not been able to do anything with it. This $300,000 in the 70s is like millions today. So that seed was always there for them. The opportune moment was when my sister and I were we had left the nest, and naturally they wanted us to come back, strangely enough. But they were like, hey, look, we want to start a legacy. We want to start a family business. And having grown up in Europe and been around it, I think we were all very impressed by that there was a moment that you could take your business and not just make widgets, but make something that could be generational. And actually that was something that I picked up. What really drove home with me is when I worked for Antinori in Italy. 26 generations of winemaking. I mean, I'm like, these guys were, giving wine to Christopher Columbus. So I think the thing is, it was really them, the driving force. But it was a family effort because it took all of us to get involved, to figure out where we wanted to go with it. And so I became involved. So we looked at the land. I sort of became involved a little bit in that, but I still didn't fully grasp what was going on in terms of farming. And I wasn't really that much in the wine, truth be told. I mean, I was just out of college. I mean, there's different types of drinks that you're drinking in college. So I kind of came at it like, well, I trust my folks, and I trust the idea. I like the idea that they're pitching here with the legacy. So I kind of got involved a little bit, and they started looking at land. They started talking to consultants and doing these UC Davis classes. And for me, the idea and a reason why I picked geology was I didn't want to be stuck in a lab with a coat on, or behind a computer in an office all day. I always loved, geology. Your work is outdoors, and so the idea for me of like, hey, wait a minute, I can do this and be with the family and maybe actually make a product that's really kind of cool was exciting. And I'm not an artist, so that part scared me, honestly, going into it. It's like, because there's a lot of art involved with wine, and I was like, well, I get science, but art's a different thing. So that's why when we kind of nailed down, this is the property we're looking at, this is where we're thinking of going, they sent me to UC Davis to do the marketing class. I fell in love with the wine industry, and also brought in the business dynamic. And that's when I realized there's art, but there's also many other facets to wine. And so maybe my strength isn't always art, but there's other things that I can excel in. So I was signed on at that point, and that was back in '98. So I came back, and literally the next day we rented a dozer. We started clearing sage and chaparral. It was what was on here before were all Texas Longhorn cattle. Those disappeared, and we started developing. So '98 to '99, we took basically we made 34 acres ready. We deep ripped it, just everything, and then in early '99 installed the irrigation system, installed the trellis system, and we planted 17 acres. And the funny thing about it is that in the late '90s there was a massive planting growth going on. So when we came, we had ordered 34 acres of grapes. We only got 17 because the nurseries were like they were undersupplying everybody. They couldn't handle the load. Like I won't name names, but like you'd walk in a nursery and they'd walk in a room like, here's your vines, and then as soon as you walk out, the next guy, here's your vines. It's like, so we were like, but and truth be told, that was like the best thing that happened to us, because here we are, a no-name vineyard, new vineyard, coming out of the market. We didn't have a lot of winery contacts. So if we came out with 34 acres of grapes at the first vintage, we'd have a lot of fruit to sell. But we came out with 17, so we didn't have that much to sell. And so it kind of slowly built. And that slowly built has been, I think, the secret to our success is we do everything slowly if we can. Our internal model is Rome wasn't built in a day. And very apropos because we lived in Rome. But the idea is that we got to do step by step, slowly. First we planted a vineyard, then I started making a little bit of wine. I'm letting the wine dictate my growth of how much wine I make. So we just, it's not like, hey, overnight I built a 20,000 case winery and I'm making 20,000 cases. You're going to buy it, you're going to love it. No, it's like, hey, we're doing this slowly. Because, my hope is in my generation, I'll be making the estate. But if I don't, no problem. My kids or my sister's kids can then take over 100% of the estate. We're not forced to. We need to be by this particular vintage of this case production. So I think that was one of the biggest draws for me, is it allows that flexibility. Again, geologists were sort of like loose. That's what I love about geology. It's like if I had somebody said to me, okay, well, why is this younger sediment on top of the older sediment? And if I had 3 explanations, they're all correct. And that's kind of like wine to me. It's like, why is this one better, or why is and you can come up with multiple explanations for something. And the same way you can make wines multiple ways, and people react to wines in multiple ways. So that's what I think was the first time that I kind of saw that light. I'm like, I can see this. Now, granted, I'm dependent upon Mother Nature, which is an unknown variable, but it's a little bit more reactive sometimes. But we try to be proactive. I think the weathermen should be a little bit more accurate, but we have to learn and adjust to that. And truth be told, we have our own weather station. We react to that more than anything else. So I think for me, the big hook was not just because, hey, this sounds cool, I'll be making wine. It was like, wait a minute, this is something that not only I could be making wine, but maybe my son or my daughter will be making it. Maybe their son or their daughter will be making it. If that's something that I know that your legacy can continue, whether it's your name and your family or it's your business as well. And so we were very excited about that. The downside with like naming a winery with your last name is you don't want to be like Mondavi or Sanford or whatever, that someday you sell your name and it's on everybody else's bottles. So that's something that I did struggle with a little bit, but we're at the beginning. I can't let that kind of I guess I'd be lucky if they sold it for millions of dollars, but we're at the beginning, and we'll just kind of plot it out as we go. But so I would definitely say my mother and father were the driving force, and my sister and I were very quick to get into that. And so we kind of all started our career paths in wine around the same time, with me getting into UC Davis, doing the marketing class. My sister at that time went from Business Week to Wine Enthusiast, and so she started being a journalist, not just for the wine side, but also scoring wines. So it kind of like it wasn't a complete shift, but it was a transition that was pretty easy to do, because I think because of our upbringing, been somewhat multicultural, we understood it. And my sister lived in Italy, so that made sense. And and then but that wasn't the end of the story. I wasn't, my dad and I, we built this thing together. Physically we're out here doing stuff. The irrigation company always laughs whenever I go in to see him to buy like a valve. because they always loved the fact that I would jump in the trenches with them and help them glue pipes, because I wanted to know what was going on. I didn't, like, what are you guys doing? Let me learn. And most guys are out there like, what are you doing? You're doing it wrong. I was just like, I don't know what they're doing, so I want to find out. So, and I think, like, so now when we kind of fast forward to today, I mean, I started taking classes at Allen Hancock College. I started learning more about what I was doing, because when you plant a vineyard, you've got downtime. You've got, in 1999 we planted the vines. We're not going to see our first crop till 2001, 2002. So I got 2 years. We're training the vines, we're doing stuff, but I got 2 years to do something. So I started taking Allen Hancock winemaking classes, viticulture classes, and then I went to the point where now I was taking them, I eventually started teaching some of them. I was a quick learner. And then my dad sat me down and said, well, where do you want to go with this? And I said, well, obviously I want to continue what I'm doing. He's like, so you probably want to think about higher education. So, he pushed me to think about, Montpellier, Bordeaux, or, UC Davis. And so UC Davis was my selection, obviously being local. So I actually got into the master's program and got a master's in viticulture enology, which I finished in 2005. So it was 03 to 05. And so that was kind of like, icing on the cake. Now it's like, okay, I bring that soil geology background. Now I can bring in the winemaking understanding, which is kind of dangerous, because I'm also a vineyard and I sell fruit to other wineries, and so it changed the dynamic with the clients, because I'd be like, what are you guys doing in there? Like, what yeast are you using? What barrels? They're kind of like, why are you asking so many questions? It was better before when you didn't ask those, No, but I mean, and that's the thing that's fun about the winery business, is that none of us can really all make the same wine. Even wines that are made out of here, they have signature traces, but they're not always the same. And that's when the fingerprint, and that's where I learned, that's the art part, is how those people use all those tools I learned about at Davis is art, because those tools are there, but how, when you do your pump overs, when you do, your pressing, when you do your, what type of barrels, those are all tools that an artist uses. It's like my wife paints using wine. Well, what type of brush she's using, what type of wine she's using, what type of paper she's using, those are all scientific tools, but how she's doing it is the art. And so I guess that's where I finally realized that I do have a little artistic side in me, was able to look at that, from that perspective. But so, but that wasn't enough for us, and for me. I mean, I went and worked in Italy. I worked for Antinori. I worked in France. I worked for Gigal, and then I had set up an internship at Penfolds in Australia, which is when my father passed away. And that changed the game plan for all of us, because it was no longer like, hey, everything's hunky-dory, we're going forward. We had to restructure everything, and there was a time where a lot of us felt like we're not sure where we're going. Because my dad and mother paved the path, and when all of a sudden there's nobody driving, you're kind of like, are we going to stay on this road? What do we got to think about it. These are all these things that you think about when something like that happens. And and there's all these like little, I'm not super religious, but these little subtle signs that are always kind of, we look back at it like, what was that? Like we always see this one deer with these huge horns that I can never find. Like, okay, that's kind of strange, right? But like for us, like 2005 was also the first year that the vineyard broke even. After all that time and money expense, 2005 we actually were like, whoa, wait a minute. The accountant called us like, hey, you guys, you're not going to go bankrupt anytime soon. So like, hey, wait a minute. Okay, so the business is solid. We have home. We have all these ingredients that my parents have set forward. So what do we do next? Well, let's just continue on this path. It seems like it's pretty solid going forward. I mean, we've gone through the hurdles. 2005 was close to it's about the 7-year mark that most businesses break it, and we had at that point made it. So all these things were like, what? These are all positive things. We're suffering the loss of the figurehead, but there's positive signs ahead. So let's honor that and let's go forward. And so I called up Peter Gago and I said, you know what? I can't do the internship. I can't be away from the ranch for 3 months. So my wife and I ended up spending a month touring around anyways, and that was actually a blessing in disguise, because look, I've cleaned enough tanks in my life. I don't need to go and do it just in the southern hemisphere. But we turned it into a business trip to be able to go around and see how they're making wines, the styles that they're doing, and have more interactions with the winemakers one-on-one. So definitely was very instrumental in forming my palate and my style that I think of how we grow grapes and make wine.